fiery crash. 7 people dead.
Once I saw that black cloud, I said they crashed.
What led up to this horrific vintage plane crash at Bradley Airport?
Crash, Bradley Airport's closed for an aircraft incident.
The crash shut down the airport for hours, and tonight an investigation is well underway.
During the course of the next coming days, you're going to hear about some heroic efforts.
Our live team coverage starts right now.
This is NBC Connecticut News at 11.
More than a dozen hours have passed, and investigators are still on the scene of that deadly plane crash at Bradley Airport.
The NTSB is combing through the wreckage looking for clues into what may have caused that fiery crash. Good evening, I'm Keisha Grant.
And I'm Mike Heideck. Here's what we know tonight. We know 7 people are dead after that World War II airplane crashed just moments after takeoff. Investigators say they expect to be on scene for 8 to 10 days now. The crash shut down part of the airport for hours today. It is back open tonight.
We have live team coverage starting with NBC Connecticut's Matt Austin and the very latest on the investigation. Matt.
Yeah, Keisha, Mike, of course, everyone's thoughts are with the loved ones of the 7 people who died and the 8 who were injured. At this point, none of their names have been released. Right now, investigators are behind us working at the crash scene looking for evidence, and they're also searching through that plane's history. Tonight, a team of federal investigators are scrambling to figure out what led to this fiery crash of a vintage military plane at Bradley International Airport.
Our mission is to determine what happened, why it happened, and to prevent it from happening again.
We're learning the World War II era B-17 bomber was part of an event run by a Massachusetts organization called the Collings Foundation. Rescuers raced to help the injured, including 10 passengers and 3 crew on the plane, as well as an airport worker on the ground.
There is a story unfolding about a very courageous individual that went towards the plane and assisted folks in getting out. There's also some stories that will unfold later on about folks that were on that plane that were able to open a hatch and assist others in leaving.
Authorities say the plane took off around 10 this morning, and within minutes, the pilot reported an issue to air traffic control.
Boeing 93012, we'd like to return to the field. November 93012, sorry, say again. What's the reason for coming back? Got number 4 engine, we'd like to return.
As the plane attempted to land, it struck runway guidance equipment and went out of control.
The plane veered to the right, crossed over a grassy area, crossed over the taxiway, and impacted a de-icing facility.
Tonight, flights started to return to normal after earlier the airport shut down for hours, forcing dozens of cancellations and delays. The airport hopes to soon reopen one still closed runway and make repairs following its first major incident here in a while.
It's been decades. Bradley Airport has a very, very good safety track record.
And tonight, the NTSB is asking anyone who has any information, pictures, or videos to email them to witness@ntsb.gov. We expect the federal investigators to be here for about a week, and then they're going to issue a preliminary report soon after that. We're live tonight at Windsor Locks. Matt Austin, NBC Connecticut News. Mike, back to you.
Long investigation ahead. Thank you, Matt. And tonight we're also learning more about some of those who survived the crash. A member of the Connecticut Air National Guard was on the plane and taken to the hospital. We also learned 2 Simsbury firefighters were on board. They survived. Their conditions are not being released just yet. Simsbury First Selectman Eric Wellman says it is important to give the family some space, but also let the firefighters know they have the support of the community.
I have no doubt that the 2 individuals who were injured in today's accident and their families are going to be surrounded by a loving community that's here to support them in the days and weeks to come.
Now we're told one of those firefighters has been with the department for 15 years. The other was there for 5.
As time passes, the chance to fly on a B-17 becomes more rare. So when the Collings Foundation offered up a piece of aviation history, people turned out to see it. Instead, they saw sheer horror.
NBC Connecticut's Dominique Moody continues our team coverage with what people saw and also heard earlier today.
Minding my business, waiting to get a load to keep working. And next thing I hear this airplane, the engine was kind of rough. Next thing I look, I see the plane going on downwind, turning base for runway 15.
Manny Rolón says he never imagined being so close to a plane crash.
Being a student pilot myself, I know when an engine sounds rough. So there was something maybe in one of the engines, and next thing I know, unfortunately, the plane crashed.
The pilot in training says he watched as the plane began descending near one of the airport runways.
I think he was flying about 800 feet. There was problems. There were really problems, because the engine was sounding rough.
Linda McGrath says she was gearing up for another day at her food stand when she saw the B-17 bomber getting closer to the ground.
I heard it. I wanted to take a picture of it. I grabbed a picture of it, and then that's when everything kind of happened. I just saw after it had kind of gone down really low, then I saw the smoke come from beyond the building.
McGrath says her heart is heavy to know that some families are now grieving.
It's very heartbreaking, especially when it's foundation.
In Windsor Locks, Dominique Moody, NBC Connecticut News.
Tonight, we are also hearing from a man who flew and maintained that very B-17 bomber for several years while he was at the Collings Foundation.
NBC Connecticut's Jamie Ratliff is live at Bradley Airport with his perspective on today's tragedy. Jamie.
Yeah, Keisha, Mike, aviation is a small community. The one involved in World War II planes, even smaller. So they are all deeply mourning the loss of lives tonight.
It's shocking. It's a tragedy. It's been a horrible day, and everyone's heart is broken today.
The B-17 plane crash sent shockwaves through the aviation community, many reaching out to each other and wondering if they were okay. Craig McBurney flew the exact same B-17 for Collings Foundation as a qualified co-pilot and mechanic for several years in the 90s. Should these B-17s be flying?
Absolutely. The B-17 was designed in the mid-1930s. That aircraft was so well engineered, it's hard to compete with it, even with today's technology.
But following this fatal crash, some are asking if there's something more that could have been done.
Before we take these planes out of the skies, we need to know whether they can be better maintained or equipped. But for right now, we need to know exactly what the cause was here.
McBurney says while he won't speculate on what happened today, that many of the pilots flying the B-17 have tens of thousands of flight hours, and the FAA regulations are stringent, telling us the navigation and communication systems have been modernized and that he never had safety concerns while co-piloting the bomber.
These are the most closely scrutinized programs that I know of for flying vintage aircraft.
McBurney says flying in a B-17 is an experience that's brought generations together and given a better understanding of a plane that helped win the war.
I can remember standing on the ramp and having a World War II pilot tell me stories about what happened to him, and his son turned to me and said, "We never knew this. If you hadn't brought this airplane here, we would not know Dad's history."
Now, regarding the Collings Foundation, McBurney says that he's so confident in the safety measures that they do take that he would work for them tomorrow. He tells us that there were 11 B-17s that were airworthy this morning. There are now 10. We're live at Bradley. Jamie Ratliff, NBC Connecticut News. Keisha.
Jamie, thank you. The airport came to a standstill today after that crash. Most of the runways reopened at around 1:30. The Connecticut Airport Authority saying that there were 39 flight cancellations and 19 delays. One of those cancellations left the UConn women's soccer team scrambling. They were heading to their game against the University of Memphis. The head coach says they got on a bus to Boston, then flew to Memphis with a connecting flight in Houston.
Not what we had planned, but it's out of our control and we can't focus on that, but it definitely doesn't help to prepare for a game tomorrow.
They're still hoping to get in around 12 a.m.
Tonight, the town of Windsor is out with a health warning over concerns that the foam used to put out the fire could potentially end up in the Farmington River. For months, NBC Connecticut Investigates has been looking into the chemicals that are inside that foam after a spill at the airport back in June. Our team coverage continues tonight with Shannon Miller.
That health advisory issued this afternoon warning people not to come into any contact with any of the foam or to eat any fish from the Farmington River. There is a major effort underway tonight to make sure none of the foam used today makes its way into the river.
Our department's emergency spill response staff remain on the scene at the airport and surrounding areas.
Katie Dykes with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection confirmed today that they are assessing if the crash resulted in any potential contamination. In this exclusive exclusive video, NBC Connecticut saw several environmental service vehicles and crews at and around Bradley earlier today. This afternoon, NBC Connecticut also saw representatives from the Windsor Department of Health putting up these notices around the Farmington River, advising people not to come into contact with foam they may encounter on the river and to not eat any fish that they catch. PFAS, the chemical contained in that firefighting foam, is under intense scrutiny in our state right now. It's been known to potentially cause adverse health effects, including cancer and developmental effects. Since the firefighting foam spill back in June, NBC Connecticut Investigates has learned that Bradley is mandated by the FAA to use the firefighting foam. However, is in the process of searching for alternatives.
When we have an incident like this, we put in our best practices to try to capture and contain as much foam.
We've also learned that Bradley has had temporary permission to close the drains at the airport that eventually lead to the nearby MDC treatment facility where the foam traveled into the Farmington River in June. But it's unclear if those drains were closed at the time of this incident. Tonight, we have learned from DEP that containment apparatus, including vacuum trucks and containment booms, have been deployed to minimize chemical release into the environment.
We wanted to just purely precautionary let everybody know via our reverse 911 that this incident happened. Its mitigation process is underway, but just make sure that they know. Especially don't take fish and eat them out of the river.
DEP says it's also working tonight to assess, manage, and contain several other contaminants released today, including glycol and fuel. Coming up tomorrow night at 11, NBC Connecticut Investigates takes a deeper look into the PFAS issue in our state and what's being done to address it.
Tonight, some startling new information is coming to light. We've learned the same plane that crashed and burned today also crashed decades ago. Chief Investigative Reporter Len Bestoff has more on that.
This plane, named the 909, had a rich history and was used in World War II, according to the Collings Foundation. In more recent times, there have been a bunch of crashes involving B-17s like the 909 and the 909 itself.
Since the 1960s, the NTSB has investigated 13 crashes involving the B-17, not including the one at Bradley International Airport. 3 of the crashes resulted in fatalities, with a total of 6 dead. The 909 was taken out of service in 1986, sold to the Collings Foundation, and restored back to its original wartime configuration. A year later, the 909 rolled off a runway while performing at an air show in Pennsylvania, crashing through a chain-link fence. There were no fatalities, but the plane had to be almost completely rebuilt. This is video of the aircraft in Rhode Island just a couple of weeks ago. According to the Collings Foundation, the 909 has a wingspan of over 103 feet, is outfitted for a 10-person crew, and weighs more than 36,000 pounds.
State Senator Heather Summers shared photos from a flight of the 909 just 3 weeks ago in Groton when she treated her father to a flight in the area. As you can imagine, she was shaken when she heard about the crash today and sends her thoughts to all the victims and their families. Len Bestoff, NBC Connecticut Investigates.
And stay with NBC Connecticut as we learn more about what could have caused today's deadly plane crash at Bradley. And when we're not on air, you can always get the updates on NBCConnecticut.com and the free NBC Connecticut app.